Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for asking me to come and speak today. So yes, I want to talk a bit about what evidence-based practice means. But before I kind of get into the body of it, I want to present you with a couple of kind of propositions just to see if you actually agree with them or not. Okay, so my assumptions behind this whole talk is that workplace and other organisational professionals should essentially try and do stuff that addresses important organisational business problems and opportunities, not trivial stuff, and should try and do what's more likely to work. Now, broadly speaking, I assume you agree on the basis you don't want to do trivial stuff that doesn't work. I assume that's the case. Though, if you reflect on what you're doing now, certainly I speak for myself too, or perhaps on your career, you might look back and go, actually, a lot of the stuff I did maybe wasn't that important, didn't make a difference, and didn't really work. Fine, we all do that. But this is the underlying premise of this talk, and this is the underlying premise of evidence-based practice. So if at any point you kind of think, why is he telling us this? It's just about this. It's all about this. What's important for the organisation? What's more likely to work? So, have you heard of evidence-based practice before? Anyone heard of evidence-based practice before this talk? In what kind of contexts? Where have you heard it? In relation to, yeah?
I've heard you talk about it.
Okay, apart from, right. Boring. Right, apart from me and now, has anyone heard of evidence-based practice in any other context? Medicine, yeah. What? Say? Therapy. Anything else? Policy making. Architecture. Yeah. It's been around for a long time. Would you feel confident you knew what it is? You think you could define it? Excellent. Hold that definition, and I'll come back to it in a minute just to check. Okay. So, evidence-based practice is kind of the elevator pitch. The decisions about important, problems and solutions should be based on the best available evidence. So for us in the context of workplace, typically that means 4 sources. It means scientific findings, organizational data, it means your expertise as a practitioner, and also what stakeholders think. The key thing about evidence-based practice is everybody uses evidence. It's not about using it. Evidence-based practice is not about using evidence, it's about the way you do it. So you're not evidence-based or not, you aren't evidence-based or not evidence-based, it's the degree to which you do it. So typically what appears to happen is people pay limited attention to the quality of evidence. So the idea we're surrounded by information and data, much of it might be really, we should just ignore it, it's nonsense. But people tend to pay attention to everything, put it in a big box or barrel and sort of try and use it to make a decision. It's about using the best available evidence, not all the evidence. Secondly, people often also pay attention to only limited sources and types of evidence. So we always use evidence, but that is not the same as an evidence-based approach. So where did it come from? Well, these are the rough dates. Some of you mentioned these, medicine, policy making. These are the rough dates where these professions started adopting the term evidence-based. So yes, it kind of started in medicine and it spread through many, many different fields. It probably only appeared in management maybe 10, 15 years ago. And again, I guess in architecture, probably around the same time, for example, as well. So these different disciplines tend to have their own centres. This is the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. This is the Centre for Evidence-Based Policing. Anybody heard of evidence-based policing? No, but it's exactly, yeah, somebody has exactly the same deal. So basically saying, if we were a bunch of police officers, there's some crimes going on, we're going to get some good evidence about what those crimes are, what should we do? We've got many choices, what's more likely to work? It's the same deal. Evidence-based policy making, someone already mentioned. This is from the US. This is from the previous president, Barack Obama, was a big supporter of evidence-based practice. Do you think the current president is a massive fan? But he's actually a good example because if we believe popular accounts, he does use evidence, but of course the sources of evidence he tends to use are things like Fox News, Twitter, his gut, stuff like that. So he is using evidence, but he's not paying attention to the quality of the evidence, and he's not really looking across multiple sources. So again, even someone who uses their gut all the time is using evidence, but it's one source and they're maybe not evaluating the quality. Conservation, education, aging care, social work, etc. It's the same thing. And most recently, the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. So we set this about 8 or 9 years ago. So if you're interested in evidence-based management, I just recommend going to this website. There's lots and lots of free resources there if you want to sort of try it a bit more for yourself. Okay, so what is it? Some of you said you knew what it was. Brilliant. Compare your definition with this. This is the sort of formal definition. It's not my definition. It's not the centre's definition. It's one that's evolved in many fields. And broadly speaking, if you looked across those different areas of practice, from medicine to policing to social work to policy making, broadly speaking, they use the same definition. It's the conscientious, which means you try, explicit, you write it down, you make it clear, and judicious, you judge the quality of evidence from multiple sources to make a better decision. The key thing is here, it's about a process. It's not about an outcome, it's about a process. It's a thing you go through to make a better decision. It's not about certainties. It's about likelihoods and probabilities. So from an evidence-based practice perspective, the strongest claims you can make is, given our evidence, it seems like that this is the problem that's going on. And given the evidence, it seems if we do this rather than this or nothing, this is more likely to fix this problem or get the outcome we want. And that sounds like a very weak claim compared to what you often hear in terms of business management, other areas claiming about stuff. But that's the kind of claim you can make. So it's not about making certainties, it's about making more probabilistic claims about what's more or less likely to work, given what we think is likely to be the issue. This is a model developed by CIPD. Some of you know CIPD is a professional body for HR professionals in the UK. This is a model developed with us, an infographic. So again, you've got the 4 sources. You have a definition of what it is, which I've already kind of explained, and then you have these 6 steps: ask a question, acquire the evidence, critically appraise it, aggregate, apply, and assess to find out what difference it made. And you go through this process, both to understand the problem or opportunity and to understand a potential solution. So you never kind of go to the solution. You always start with, obviously, a diagnosis. But that's, as you know, is easier said than done, I think, in many contexts. So here's an example. Any of you ever done stuff on creativity and innovation? Anybody? It's the kind of thing that tends to overlap a bit in workplace design occasionally. People kind of see it as a means of sort of increasing or boosting creativity. But supposing you or your organization or your clients think that they've got a problem with low creativity. So we're not creative enough here. We need to do something about it. And because it is, you should sort of look at how you've measured creativity and how would you approach this problem, potential solutions from an evidence-based practice perspective. I'm just going to give you examples of the kinds of questions you, your team, with your clients, these are the kinds of questions you'd ask to elicit the kind of information to help you make a more evidence-based practice decision. So they're the 4 sources again. Firstly, you'd ask about your own experience. Have we seen these kind of creativity problems before? Why do we think creativity here might be an issue or problem? What tells us that from our experience? If we think it is a problem, then what about solutions? What do we think might work? Now, you could say, well, is your expertise a very good or high quality source of evidence? Well, that's true of any source of evidence. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the point is, unless you make it explicit and discuss it, you can't critically praise it and look at its quality. So for every single source of evidence, irrespective of where it's from, you always have to ask, how relevant, applicable, and trustworthy is this evidence? So in this case, I would say, unless you spent 20 or 30 or 40 years working on employee creativity, probably your professional expertise about what works is probably quite limited because you would have had to experience maybe dozens, hundreds and hundreds of examples of interventions to improve creativity. But you should look at it because it might be useful and it will be strongly shaping the way you collect evidence. People go into situations, obviously, with very strong beliefs about what's going on. Secondly, then, is looking at organizational data. What actually is the creativity level around here? Are our measures valid and reliable? Do we know that our level of creativity is causing problems? Is it low and we're not growing, we're not making money, we're not developing? What is the actual problem with it? And if we think it's a problem, similarly, what do we do about solution? What's going on that might indicate there's a solution? Can we find differences between employees or shifts or locations that say, well, why are these people so creative and these people aren't? Is this giving us a clue about interventions? And again, how relevant and trustworthy is that evidence? Third source is scientific literature. Now, you might go and look at the scientific literature and say, well, what do we know about creativity? Why do we think it's low? What does a systematic review of the evidence say the problems with creativity? Is there lots of evidence that says if an organisation is low on creativity, it's a disaster for the organisation? Is there lots? Is there a little? Is it good quality? Is it not? Or is there evidence that says, you know what, doesn't make much difference? I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. You have to find out. Similarly, if you think it is a problem, then you might again look at the scientific evidence as a third source to say, what are the solutions? Are there lots of interventions, including perhaps workplace design, to say how you increase creativity? Do we know much about this? What do we know? And again, how relevant and reliable and trustworthy is it? Fourth area is stakeholders. You might talk to customers, clients, employees. We think there's a problem with the creativity of our employees. What do you think? And employees say, no, we're creative. What are you talking about? It's the managers. They kind of always are they're not supporting us and giving an idea. We're plenty creative, but it's the manager. Or the customers say, well, why do you think you're not creative? We see so many innovations coming out from you. What are you talking about? Or they might say, yeah, actually, you're a bit kind of stale, you have got no new ideas. What do stakeholders think about the problem? And if they think it's a problem, what do they think about potential solutions? And again, how relevant, applicable, and trustworthy is it? These are examples of the kinds of questions you would ask to start to go to an evidence-based practice process to both saying, is there an issue here with employee creativity and innovation? And if there is, what can we do about it? Does that broadly make sense, that process? Does it sound exhausting? Is it doable? How quickly do you think you could do that? Weeks, months, years? What do you reckon? Weeks? Yeah, you might want to spend a week on it. How many, like a stupid question, who likes eating out and having nice food? Yeah, many people, I do. If you go to a new city you've never been to before, and you want to you arrive in your hotel at 6 o'clock at night, you really don't know the city, and you want to have a good dinner, what kind of evidence would you get to help you make a decision about where to book a restaurant? TripAdvisor, good example. Is TripAdvisor a reliable and trustworthy source of evidence? Right. Maybe, sometimes, possibly, absolutely, and that is true of every single source of evidence. Does it mean you shouldn't use it? No, of course you should use it, but you should treat it with caution. You should understand the biases, and those biases might be that we know you can pay organisations to write good reviews of your place and bad reviews of your competitors. You can invent a restaurant that doesn't exist, and people get it really highly rated. So there's issues around its reliability and trustworthiness. Should you not use it? No, of course you should, but you should be aware of the limitations. And to repeat, that's true of every source of information. So we've got TripAdvisor. What else?
Concierge, someone on the desk.
The concierge. Can't you trust the concierge? No. Why not? Bribes, kickbacks. Oh, let me book that for you. Yes, of course I can book it for you. And of course they're booking it not because they're being nice entirely. They're booking it because they want to make sure the restaurant knows that when you show up, those customers there because you sent them for a kind of kickback. So maybe not the concierge. So we've got concierge, TripAdvisor. What else? Any other sources?
Call a friend.
Call a friend. A friend who likes food or a friend who doesn't like food? A friend who likes food, yeah. What else could you do?
Ask a local.
Ask a local. Now, that's interesting. So if we walked out of here, walked around King's Cross St Pancras, asked the locals, I mean, I know what you mean, but it's putting a lot of emphasis and weight on the fact that people wandering around are really into food and eating restaurants. They might not. But you could ask a local. You could walk around and see where's busy. What's typically the busiest restaurants in many cities in the world? McDonald's. So there's not much of a clue, right? So it could be other restaurants. So yeah, this is an example. There's multiple sources of evidence. If you were with me on this trip, you're in your room, I'm in my room, you're waiting for me to book a restaurant, you kind of text me, say, what are you doing? I'm still trying to find a really good restaurant. I've been for TripAdvisor, asked the concierge, I've been outside, I've looked at time out. Eventually you say, come on, just book a restaurant. Now, I might only have an hour, half an hour. Sometimes people have literally had to drag me out of the bedroom and say, stop, enough, we're going to go and eat now. Oh, just one more Google search, one more bit of it. Yeah, you have to just draw a line and say, that's it. Now, if I only had half an hour to do that, would that increase my chances of getting a good dinner than not doing it at all? Yeah. If I spent half an hour, right. Yeah. And that's the principle of evidence-based practice. It's about making a more informed decision. It doesn't guarantee I'm going to get a great dinner, but it makes it more likely. Doing it not at all is worse than doing it for 10 minutes. Probably doing it for half an hour is better. Doing it for 5 hours, probably it's not going to make any difference. So that's the whole principle, about a more informed decision. So this does look exhausting, but if you need to do it quickly, you can. And I think it's still likely to help you make a better informed decision and get to the outcome you want. Okay, do you think you're doing this already? Inherently, I like it. Implicitly, inherently. So that kind of means, no, I'm not doing it in another way. No, it means I am kind of doing it, but not. Anyone think they're doing this? 4 sources, 6 steps. Which bits are you not doing? Are you critically appraising explicitly the quality of the information you're using?
It's kind of important to try and foreground it, otherwise you might be subject to kind of biases and whatnot.
Yeah, you might be. You've got to foreground it. But are you doing that? Are you looking across multiple sources? How many? 2?
Do you think we tend to favour some sources?
Yes, I think different people favour sources. We tend to favour. What's the source of information we can get to easiest? What's in our heads? Well, Google, yeah, or possibly Google is even faster than what's in our head sometimes. Yeah, Google or what's in our head. So we tend to favour things that's easy to get hold of. So I think these are the three main differences between what everybody uses evidence. I've already said that. But I think these are the three main differences. It's the approach to evidence, conscientious, explicit, judicious. There's a different kind of way of approaching using evidence. It's multiple sources, both to triangulate, but also to contextualise. You may have a great scientific study, but unless you've got organisational data and stakeholder perspectives, you won't be able to use it or make sense of it. Is it relevant? I don't know. We need that other information too. And also this structured or stepped approach. So again, we all use evidence, but there's some fundamental differences between evidence-based practice and generally the use of evidence. So I think the interesting thing about evidence-based practice for me, one of the things I'm thinking about more and more, is that it sort of broadly makes sense, but people don't do it very much. In not just you or me, but in many, many professions. So why don't they? I think understanding some of these barriers is pretty important. So here are some. I'm not going to go into all of them, just some on the top left. Why don't people do it? Things get in the way. Let's try and understand some of those things, because maybe it will help us overcome them if we want to do it. I'm assuming, by the way, you kind of want to do this, because again, going back to the point, you still want to do things that are important for an organisation and business, and you still want to do things that are more likely to work. I'm assuming that's still the case. I may have put you off that now. You may think, I want to do trivial stuff that doesn't work because actually, come on, give me a break, it's easier, whatever. Yes. Okay, fine. But misconceptions, this is something that gets in the way. When people hear evidence-based practice, it stops them from really wanting to kind of use it. The first thing is people often think it means they can't use their own experience. Like, and I think the early days of evidence-based practice, both in medicine and other fields, was scientists say, oh, we've got a massive meta-analysis, you need to do that. And that's not what evidence-based practice is. So, of course, you have to use it, but it's absolutely essential. People think often evidence tells you the truth and can prove things. Do you think, for example, scientific studies tell you the truth? Do you think you can prove things with science? Yeah? Think you can prove it? Or do you think it's just contingent and it sort of depends because another study might come along and go, actually, we used to think it was that, but not so sure. I think it's more the latter. I think the only place you find proof is in things like maths, algebra, formal logic, that kind of thing. It's not about proof and truth, okay? And the reason this puts people off is because it's a very high bar, because people eventually say, oh, you can't prove anything anyway. So what's the point? The good news is we're not trying to prove anything. We're trying to make a more informed decision. You could say to me when I've chosen a restaurant in that city we've never been to before, you could say, oh, but you haven't proven that is the best restaurant. You haven't got the truth about, no, who cares? I'm going to get a better dinner. I'm not after proof and truth. And that's really important because it's a very, very high bar to set. And broadly speaking, as I go back to science, other data, it's not about truth either. It's about probabilities, likelihood, it appears if this is likely. It's not about truth. These are absolute terms which are not very helpful, I think. It's also not about making perfectly informed decisions. I refer back to my restaurant example. It's about making more informed decisions. And also, it's not about getting the answer. As we've all experienced, the more information you get about a problem and potential solutions, actually you don't get the answer. You think, okay, it's not really the problem I thought it was, and it's two problems. And actually, this solution isn't really a solution. Maybe there's a few other things I need to do. Now, you could see that as a terrible disaster, or you could say, hey, I just learned something. So getting more information is confusing and doesn't give you the answer, but that doesn't mean it isn't useful. And that's one of the key points. So these are some misconceptions. I think in many fields, there's also some misconceptions about the role of science, and I think workplace has got all a bit sciencey in the last probably 10 or 15 years, maybe 20 years. And these are some of the misconceptions of science that also get in the way. I think the breakthrough studies are the most important. New, exciting studies are the most important. But no, obviously, by definition, new studies are the most unreliable studies. So they're far from being the greatest. They're possibly, we just don't know if they're great or not. We just don't know because only one or two. Single scientific studies can be important. No. Broadly speaking, a single scientific study is never important. Why? Because it's unreliable. You need to replicate, then maybe. But what we're often exposed to are single studies. People make a big deal, they go to a journal, they show an article, oh, this person found that in this study, in this context. Oh, it's kind of interesting, but I can't use it because I need to know, it's not very reliable. It's fun, it's interesting, maybe there's just some insights, but it's not reliable in terms of evidence. Science published in peer-reviewed journals can be automatically trusted? No, for all kinds of reasons I won't go into now. Science is the highest quality evidence. Of course it isn't. Depends what your question is. You may have, it says there, you may have organisational data that's actually much higher quality than anything you find in a so-called peer-reviewed journal. Scientists themselves are reliable sources of evidence? Of course they're not. And terms like, you must have all heard terms like science shows, studies find, we know from science. No, no, no. These are all kind of red flags. Someone's trying to scientize you. They're trying to blind, we don't, just, it's not how science works, I think. There's also a particular branch of science, which again, I think has partly infected also workplace stuff, which is neuroscience. And if you're interested in trying to debunk some of the claims made often in the name of neuroscience, it's worth following these two people on Twitter who basically kind of examine some of these claims and go, well, what's this based on? What is the science? And even if it's based on science, is the science any good? And often in the case of neuroscience, it appears there's serious problems with it, both in terms of methods, sample size, other kinds of things. It's not a, I wouldn't say highly trustworthy body of evidence anyway, but that's another issue. So one obstacle, I think, is that. Another obstacle is cognitive biases. I'm sure most of you heard of things like System 1 and System 2, the idea that, things get in the way. We're kind of, we want to make these fast, intuitive decisions, which is great for lots of things. It's really terrible for other kinds of decisions. So intuitive is good for some things, terrible for other things. And indeed, you could argue evidence-based practice has evolved in part to try and push people out of System 1 thinking into System 2. That's almost why it had to be designed, because of this tendency to sort of drop back into System 1 thinking all the time. So again, you've probably all seen these illusions. Are these lines straight or wonky? Wonky, well, they're not, they're straight. How do you find out? You measure it or something, right? You measure, and that's a principle of evidence-based practice. You see some evidence, it looks like that, let me check it. Let me get another source of evidence, which could be a rule, or it could be looking down the side of the slide, because it looks wonky, but is it? This is a sort of quite extreme one, but again, the lines are parallel, not straight. This is something else. Is this an illusion, or is it real? What do you think? Can we believe this? You must have seen models like this before. Endless, endless, endless models of, in this case, employee experience. Not picking on this in particular. So yeah. Say again?
It's just graphic design.
Wait, it's just graphic design, probably, but it's actually posing as something else, which is, well, what is it? So these things do these things, it leads to this, which leads to that. Okay, that's interesting. Let me check it out. Is it an illusion, or is actually that's what goes on? Here's another one. These circles are actually parallel. It looks like they're going into each other if you follow one around. This is another example of one, employee experience, the new employee engagement, same sort of thing. That leads to that. Okay, that looks really interesting. Is it an illusion, or is it real? I don't know. Let's check it out. And similarly, this is just a weird one. If you look around this, what happens to the dots? Yeah, they keep just sort of shifting position and so on. So that, I think, is the second barrier, and this is a classic one. Who's seen this question before? Okay, if you've seen it before, you're not allowed to answer. Those people who haven't seen it before, I'll give you 10 seconds to give an answer. Okay, what's the answer? Have you seen it before? No. Okay, what's the answer you want to give, even though you know it's probably wrong? Okay, put your hand up if you kind of want to say 10p. Yeah, do you want to say something else?
I was going to say 90p.
Okay, you're going to say 90, so we've got 10p, we've got 90p. Anyone want to say something else who hasn't seen it before? 5, yeah. The correct answer is 5 pence. Most people think it's 10 pence, including me. Some of you will leave today still thinking it's 10 pence. Occasionally, people have even emailed me saying, are you sure it's not 10 pence? It is 10 pence. Sorry, it is 5 pence. See? Just did it. It is 5 pence. Yeah. And you can check it out. If you put in 10 pence to the equation, it doesn't work. So yeah, but it looks, there's another kind of bias. The way it's worded is forcing us to go this way. And of course, the worst kind of bias, there's hundreds of kind of biases, is a metacognitive bias, the belief we're not biased. So this gets in the way as well. Okay, third kind of barrier is strong and wrong beliefs. I'm going to go through this quite quickly. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. The idea that strong beliefs which are wrong are problematic, and actually not knowing things is fine because you're going to find out. Here's some questions of, you may not have these, but people sometimes do. What do you think has happened to average job tenure in the past 10 years? How long people stay in jobs? Who thinks it's gone up? People staying in jobs longer. Who thinks it's gone down? People staying in jobs less. Yeah, that's sort of typical. Who thinks it's about the same? Okay, this is a CIPD study published around 2010 that suggests that basically job tenure didn't shift greatly between the 70s and the mid-2000s. Average job tenure actually appears to increase slightly in recent years. So far from going down, national average data, the same is more or less true in the States, actually suggests, why do we think it has? I don't know. But we do. Here's the percentage of the workforce in permanent employment over the past 20 years. Who think it's gone up? There's a higher percentage of people in permanent employment than 20 years ago. Higher, a few of you. Who thinks it's lower? There are fewer people in permanent employment. Who thinks it's the same? Who's just not going to answer now? Okay. This is a Work Foundation study published a couple of years ago. The second column is most important, and essentially it's suggesting there is no difference. Hasn't kind of changed at all. Again, people think it has. And similarly, generational differences in work attitudes, nothing going on. Fine, I've got 1 minute left. I'm going to quickly go through management fads and fashions. Here's some examples. Some of you may know some of these. And people try to trace these fads and fashions. These get in the way simply because people are trying to make decisions about problems and they're trying to make decisions about what to do. Fads and fashions, I think your debates about it later, just tend to get in the way of kind of evidence-based practice because they're distracting in effect. And you could say, I don't know if these are fads or fashions in your field in particular or not. They may be, they may not. But broadly speaking, fads are a problem because they prevent critical thinking and they encourage this thing called solutioneering. Solutioneering is where you define a problem by the absence of a solution. The solution you've normally thought of and quite like. So the problem is we don't have an employee experience program. Well, that's not a problem. That's a thing you could do about a non-defined problem. Similarly, the problem is we need to increase flexible working. That's a problem we need to do. Well, why? You can do that, but what's the problem it's trying to address? I'm not talking about that, but there's terrific things from Yahoo and HP published a while ago. They're fantastic things where people actually set out why they're trying to reduce flexible working. It's full of solutioneering. It's so clear they've decided they want to clamp down on flexible working, then they make up all these reasons why it's going to help a non-defined problem. Anyhow, right. So just to conclude, how can we become more evidence-based? I think spend more time getting evidence about real business problems. Allegedly, Einstein, one of the many things Einstein probably never said was that if he had 24 hours to save the world, he'd spend like 22 hours diagnosing the problem and 2 hours implementing the solution. And I think often we do it completely the other way around. We spend 2 hours thinking about what the problem is and a lot more time rolling out, implementing, doing stuff than actually saying, what's the problem? I think ask the question why a lot, maybe more humility, less solutioneering, and I think more healthy skepticism is quite important. And using an evidence-based practice decision support, such as the infographic I showed. So you stay on track. You say, what are the different sources of evidence? How have we gone through this process? The disadvantages are it challenges beliefs, it requires more effortful thinking, makes it hard to follow fads, it stops power and authority based on certain kinds of decision making. I guess you all know what, because I say so, you all know what JFD is, right? Just effing do it. Who knows what hippo decision making? Hippo? Anybody? Highest paid person's opinion. And I almost guarantee, if you've been working for a while, you will have been in a meeting where people are trying to make a decision, and everyone goes, they find it really hard to make it, and all eyes fall on the highest paid. Well, what do you think? Okay, we'll do that. Yeah, highest paid person's opinion, and also reduces action orientation and management. These are disadvantages. I also think they're advantages. I think slowing down, not making decisions purely based on authority is not actually a bad thing to do in organisations. And also, evidence-based practice, as far as I can see, is the only way you actually learn more about your work. If you just keep doing stuff, you can keep doing stuff, but unless you go through a process like that, you essentially won't learn very much about the organisations you work with, or the research in your field, or your own experience. You'll just keep doing stuff. And also, it's important because I think in the end, it's the only way we can do that. If you agree with that, doing what's important, doing what's more likely to work, something like evidence-based practice, as far as I can see, is the only way of doing that. Thank you very much.